Chicago Playwrights, the new web series by the CLYDE FITCH report, in which we interview the resident playwrights at Chicago Dramatists. My name is Sean Douglas, and we have Beck Willett on camera. And today our guest is Mia McCullough. Mia McCullough is a playwright, screenwriter, professor at Northwestern University, and a stand-up comedian. Her plays include Chagrin Falls, Sense Africa, Impenetrable, Taking Care, and Echoes of Another Man, among numerous others. They've been produced all over the country, and she also tweets at Brazen Hussy Rant. She's here today to talk to us about some issues our country has with the classics. So tell us, what is the concern with the classics in our country? What is this obsession with Shakespeare and dead male playwrights, and why is that a problem?
Well, you know, I've sort of been, I think people have thought of me as like the Shakespeare hater, because I've been on Shakespeare's case a little bit for a while now. You say that he's overproduced, and it's like, it's like walking into a church and telling people that Jesus is an asshole. People get very sensitive about it. Mm-hmm. But the thing that I found, I went and did a study last spring. I was doing a study on gender parity, but I decided to parse out not just how many dead playwrights we were producing, but also how many of them were Shakespeare. So I had a category for living male playwrights, librettists and composers, living women playwrights, librettists and composers, dead male playwrights and librettists and composers who were not Shakespeare, the dead women, and then Shakespeare. And Shakespeare came out at 5.5% of the productions in all TCG theaters that reported over that 2012-2013 season.
So about 1 in 20. About
1 in 20. So it's a lot. I mean, I had been saying in my stand-up routines that Shakespeare was the most produced playwright in the country, and I was like, oh, look, I was right about that. Mm-hmm. So, but
he does have his own section of the bookstore.
He does have his own section.
He's the only author that will have his own name on a placard for a separate shelf.
Yeah. And actually, the last time I did my Shakespeare bit at a comedy show, it was in a bookstore, and right after I'd done it, I went and I was like, oh, look, there's the Shakespeare section right there outside the bathroom. But anyhow, so what I realized at a certain point was that really, in some ways, the Shakespeare productions are a little bit of a scapegoat and not the root of the problem, because there was a statistic out there a couple of years ago that less than 10% of Americans go to see the theater at all. And I don't mean Broadway or commercial theater or Broadway in Chicago, but nonprofit, Steppenwolf, Goodman, Chicago Dramatists, storefront theater. Less than 10% of the population go to see that. And that's an enormous problem that we have such a small audience. So I started thinking about, like, well, why are there people out there like my former next door neighbor who said, well, I don't like the theater, and students of mine tell me about their family members or brothers who just say, I don't like theater. And that's a little bit like saying you don't like music. It seems sort of crazy.
It's a whole genre of art.
It's an entire art form being dismissed. And I was like, well, why is that happening? And I do believe that actually Shakespeare and the other classics are also at fault there, but it's the English teachers in high schools that are making that happen. I feel like there's definitely like the sacredness, like cult of Shakespeare in this country, where it's how people kind of got into theater and how they found their love, and a lot of people felt at home and belonging for the first time in a theater situation. And so if Shakespeare's at all linked to that, I feel like there's some like emotional irrational tie, because people get very, very upset when they hear me talk like this. They're like, no, it's not a cult, that's wrong. And I'm like, oh, it feels like a cult. Mm-hmm. So but all the English teachers are in the cult. They all fell in love with Shakespeare's words, and justifiably so. They're beautiful. I understand why actors want to say them all the time. I understand why English teachers want to teach them. But when all that these kids are learning is the classics, especially as our population becomes more and more, with more and more immigrants coming in and fewer people having English as their first language, where Shakespeare is really hard, even for very educated people when English is not their first language. We're alienating this population, and they don't know that theater is other things besides the classics. And because there's no new work being introduced to these kids, they have no idea that there's people like me and all the other resident playwrights at Chicago Dramatists, and
Why are we not teaching you in high schools?
Right, exactly, or anybody really. I mean, there's a lot of my plays I wouldn't send to high school kids, but there's some of them that I would. I mean, since Africa could be joined up with a history curriculum, and Impenetrable deals with all these body issues, so I feel like there's definitely, every playwright has a play out there that could be in a high school curriculum, and that could show kids that theater is actually a present, active thing that's happening now, that's being written now. All these playwriting programs that happen, you know, that Chicago Dramatists does going into high schools, teach kids that they can actually create theater themselves, and that it's not hard and it's not expensive, and it gives people a voice, you know, and that kids could feel their voice reflected in plays that are being written today. And then of course the cultists would be like, but Shakespeare is so universal that people can feel themselves reflected, but not everybody can. And I think the fact that 90% of the population doesn't even show up to the theater says that really 90% of the population doesn't actually think that they can relate and see themselves in Shakespeare, that it's too much work.
Thank you so much for joining us today.
Thank you for
having me. And good luck with your new study.
Thanks.
This has been the second episode of Chicago Playwrights. Thank you for joining us.